Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 2 of the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, June 16, 2025, the committee commences its consideration of Bill C-5, an act to enact the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act and the Building Canada Act. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including, of course, our interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses as well as our members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. First, appearing from Electricity Canada, we have Mr. Francis Bradley, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to you. From Public Policy Forum, we have Ms. Yota Kokinos, Senior Executive Advisor. Welcome to you. And online, we have Mr. David Robitaille, Full Professor, Civil Law Section, Faculty of Law, University of Ottawa. Welcome to you, sir. Yes, Mr. Albus.
I just wanted to thank you for giving me the floor. Usually when a government tables legislation and is referred to a committee from the House, we get the ministers here. I just wanted to put on note, I'm deeply dissatisfied, not at you, Mr. Chair, or the clerk's activities here. This was hastily done. But to have a government say that this was their #1 priority for this week and to program a motion to not have the ministers come here and justify themselves in front of this committee, I think is distasteful, and I am going to let the ministers know that when they decide to appear, I guess to do cleanup. But thank you, Mr. Chair, for making that statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albus. I can confirm with members that the clerk has done a diligent job of securing ministers for tomorrow. They will be appearing at 3:30 p.m. I believe we have confirmed Minister LeBlanc as well as Minister Freeland, and I know that the clerk is working on many others to appear tomorrow, so I can confirm that for members. We'll begin our opening remarks. If it's okay with you, Mr. Bradley, we'll begin with you. If you have opening remarks, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Bon, ben merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Oui, je
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am the CEO of Electricity Canada, and Electricity Canada is the National Association of the Electricity Industry, and our members are producing and transporting and distributing electricity in all the provinces and territories of Canada.
To speak to Bill C-5 today, and today I'll be focusing specifically on my comments on the Building Canada Act. We believe that this bill represents an important step towards accelerating the approval of major projects in Canada that will help to build the infrastructure that Canada needs to bolster our economic sovereignty and security. Electricity is central to Canada's economic success. Available, affordable power was key to building a prosperous country for our parents and grandparents. The electricity infrastructure that we build today will do the same for our children and grandchildren. Demand for clean, reliable, and affordable electricity is predicted to as much as double in some jurisdictions. This is being driven by population growth, rising industrial demand, and new technologies like electric vehicles and data centers. This need will only grow greater as Canada pursues industrial strategies to make itself more globally competitive. We need to build more generation, more transmission, and more distribution infrastructure over the next 2 decades than we have built in generations. Unfortunately, Canada's approval process for major projects has not been up to the task. We've been ranked second to last in the OECD in the time it takes to get construction permits, for example. Streamlining regulatory approvals is a necessary step to get building at pace and at scale. Faster approvals can help get energy projects like new nuclear projects, hydro dams, and transmission lines in operation faster. It reduces costs and project risk. The Building Canada Act is a key step towards building important things faster. It focuses on how to move a project of national interest forward, not whether it should move forward. We can move faster while forging strong Indigenous partnerships and adhering to environmental protections. The Act has the potential to provide greater certainty for investors. It mirrors key recommendations that we've made to government, which are included in the annual State of the Industry report that we provided to you. Electricity Canada has long advocated for a 2-year time limit on project approvals and for the government to adopt a one project, one review approach. We also believe that a central major projects office can help coordinate between departments and act as the main point of contact for industry as we navigate an often cumbersome federal system. Beyond approvals, such an office could also help coordinate funding and financing support. While this bill will have a primary impact on designated projects of national interest and what is of greater national interest than a strong electricity grid, the lessons learned from these could kick off a needed culture shift in our regulatory agencies and allow for broader improvements. Integrating these lessons more broadly should be an explicit goal of the bill. Because ultimately, it is essential that the regulatory environment for all projects is improved. Delays in getting permits and approvals adds cost for industry, no matter the size of the project. And those costs all end up on customers' bills. The government must look at how we can better support existing infrastructure. If demand is going to double, we'll have to preserve and optimize what we already have. Too often, federal rules make it difficult to maintain or expand electricity infrastructure, even if it has been in place for decades. The Fisheries Act is the best example, where changes made in 2019 have complicated even the most straightforward maintenance. We also need to make sure that operating rules don't hinder reliability. The clean electricity regulations will add significant costs and add reliability risks in several Canadian jurisdictions while not meaningfully reducing emissions. Building the system will also require significant investment, which is likely too great for the ratepayer alone. Parliament must pass the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit to support projects. It should also expand coverage to include all transmission and support distribution investments. Electricity is a Canadian advantage. We have one of the cleanest electricity in the world at 84% non-emitting. It is reliable and it is competitive. It is a key foundation for Canada's future economic success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bradley. And next, we'll go over to Ms. Kokinos. Ms. Kokinos, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Yota Kokinos, Senior Executive Advisor at the Public Policy Forum and former Director General at Natural Resources Canada. It's an honor to be with you today. I think we can all agree that Canada is at a crossroads. We have the resources, talent, and global demand, but we're not building energy, infrastructure, and critical minerals projects fast enough. The Build Big Things report is the Public Policy Forum's call to action, a roadmap to unlock billions in investment, attract global capital, and fast-track nation-building projects. We launched it in response to a sharp drop in investment and the urgent need for a bold, coordinated strategy to move projects forward. What we call the playbook outlines 10 essential plays that, taken together, will ensure that key projects will rapidly advance. The playbook's premise is that if we build big things, Canada can reduce its reliance on the U.S. market, become a trusted global supplier of energy and critical minerals, and meet our climate goals, and strengthen the infrastructure that connects our country and supports our sovereignty. Let me start with why building big things matters. Donald Trump provided Canada with a needed wake-up call. Canada must expand its market access and strengthen federal-provincial cooperation to stay competitive. Yet investments in major projects is falling, despite our massive potential. Navius Research modeled over $600 billion in proposed projects that are on the books right now that could add $1.1 trillion to GDP by 2035, a 4.5% increase. That's real growth driven by Canadian resources, Canadian workers, and Canadian leadership. I would add it's not just about growth. It's about making sure we have reliable, affordable energy that will drive all industrial activity, investment, and job creation in Canada and allow us to export to the world. It's about critical mineral supply chains, as well as addressing our climate goals. This is about being bold, strategic, and globally competitive. The good news is that momentum is building across governments to accelerate the identification and approval of nation-building projects. The Public Policy Forum convened federal and provincial governments, regulators, Indigenous groups, and industry in our broadest consultation ever. And we identified 4 levers which, if aligned effectively, will unlock investment and drive growth. They are coordinating financing to de-risk projects and attract private capital. There is a global competition right now for financing. Other countries are moving faster. We need to streamline regulations to make them clear, fast, and environmentally effective, providing enabling infrastructure such as transmission lines, roads, ports, and the workforce to support major builds, and of course, Indigenous economic participation. This is critical, including real equity and capital access from day one. They're all practical steps, they are achievable, and they're very much aligned with the direction that Bill C-5 is going. This legislation is a vital first step, but implementation depends on strong partnerships across governments and with Indigenous peoples. That's where major projects have succeeded in the past. Our playbook offers a path forward, but the details matter. We recommend 10 essential plays. I will highlight 3 of these that would enhance the bill's implementation. First, we need strong, accountable governance, starting with the Prime Minister. These projects are vast and complex and necessitate a high degree of oversight to succeed. We suggest a Deputy Ministers Committee that meets regularly, backed by a Cabinet Committee, to drive coordination and delivery. When governments are disciplined, focused, aligned, and committed, we can succeed. We did it during COVID, we can do it again. Second, we need to sort out the alphabet soup of federal funding programs. Right now, project proponents and Indigenous peoples are bounced from the Canada Infrastructure Bank to the Clean Growth Fund, and so on and back again. There's about 10. This process needs coordination. We need a single front door to package the right mix of loans, guarantees, and incentives. Third, we need a strategic investment office, not just a regulatory office. It should be a whole-of-government team that aligns financing, regulatory approvals, broader infrastructure, and Indigenous participation under one roof, with the financial expertise to assess projects and deliver value for public dollars. In closing, how this bill is implemented will determine whether it delivers. It will take strong, sustained leadership across all levels of government and a culture shift within the public service, one that breaks down the silos, prioritizes collaboration, speed, and problem solving, and embraces opportunity over risk avoidance. Implementation isn't the fine print. It is the outcome. I invite you to read the Build Big Things report on the Public Policy Forum website. It was entered into evidence. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kokinos. Prochainement, next, we'll go to Mr. Robitaille, who's joining us online. The floor is yours, sir. You have 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup.
Hello, thank you very much. The Building Canada Act will be the main focus of my speech today, and it could have a significant impact on provincial jurisdictions in Canada. The Prime Minister has publicly stated that he wants provincial laws to be respected in this project, but as currently drafted, the Act does not allow for this intention to be realized. The Act is not explicitly limited to works, projects, or infrastructure under exclusive federal jurisdiction. The concept of a project of national interest is broad enough to include projects located entirely within a province. The preamble provides, for instance, that projects of national interest include those that, among other things, enhance Canada's capacity to conduct trade, enhance the development of Canada's natural resources, and enhance Canada's energy production and infrastructure. The development of natural resources and the strengthening of Canada's energy capacity largely involve projects that normally fall under provincial jurisdiction under sections 92A1 and 9210 of the Constitution Act of 1867, the exploration, extraction, and production of non-renewable natural resources, forestry, and hydroelectricity, as well as related environmental considerations, have been assigned to the provinces by the constituent. The preamble therefore appears at first glance to refer to federal works as well as provincial works, contrary to the constitutional division of powers. Furthermore, the bill grants very broad discretionary power to the Governor and Council to designate a project of national interest. Under subsection 5.6, this designation may be made by order on the recommendation of the Minister, taking into account certain factors that are neither cumulative nor exhaustive. Although the bill provides for consultation with the provinces in subsection 5.7, it does not make the designation of projects of national interest conditional on their consent. So this leaves the door open for the federal government to impose unilateral decisions on the provinces in their own areas of jurisdiction. With regard to conditions that will be imposed on projects of national interest, the bill does not provide for any obligation to consult the provinces. According to subsection 7.2, the minister responsible must consult with the relevant federal ministers and the indigenous peoples concerned. It therefore appears that after being consulted when a project is added to the schedule listing projects of national interest, the provinces are no longer involved in the development of the projects or in ensuring that the conditions imposed on them are met. The projects therefore appear to be completely outside the control of provinces, and in particular outside the application of provincial standards such as those provided in Quebec's Quality of the Environment Act or its equivalent in other provinces. Finally, the bill frequently uses the term national interest. This could mean that the Parliament considers the Building Canada Act to be a valid exercise of the national interest doctrine. But in Canadian constitutional law, the national interest doctrine meets criteria that have been fairly well defined by the Supreme Court, and recently so. So matters of importance to Canada as a whole that, based on clear evidence, truly transcend provincial interests may be of national interest. According to the Supreme Court, these matters must be specific, clearly distinguishable from matters of provincial jurisdiction, and have an impact that extends beyond provincial boundaries and the province's ability to act in a lasting manner. Matters of national interest have been recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada in its latest decision on GHG pricing. So we are talking about the pollution of the province's inland seas, the creation of the National Capital Commission's Green Zone, nuclear energy, and aeronautics in the same framework. These are specific and distinct matters that, by their nature and effects, are inherently extra-provincial in character. Very broad and vague matters that constitute aggregates of provincial powers are therefore not of national interest. This is the case, for instance, with inflation, the environment, and greenhouse gases as a whole, which the Supreme Court has ruled are not of national interest. So as you can see, the national interest in the constitutional sense is quite specific and narrowly defined and does not correspond to what might generally be considered to be of national interest in economic and commercial terms. Given all of this, it is far from certain that the Building Canada Act would be found valid on the basis of the national interest doctrine by the courts. So even though it contained several references to federal powers, the Impact Assessment Act was nevertheless found to be partially unconstitutional by the Supreme Court because of its overly broad and imprecise scope and its encroachment on provincial powers. By not expressly providing that its objectives are limited to projects within federal jurisdiction, the bill is therefore at risk, C5 that is, it's at risk of being struck down. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Robitaille.
Today with a line of Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here in person and virtually from your testimony. We as Conservatives over the last 10 years certainly have advocated for certainty, clarity, predictability, and fairness in conditions for proponents to be able to invest and build, and have long advocated for expedited approvals and for clarity from the government. Mr. Bradley, maybe we could start with you. Can you outline your main concerns regarding C5 in terms of certainty and clarity?
The principal concerns that I have are what's not covered by C5. I think the challenge that I foresee is the expectation is there will be a small set of projects that will be deemed in the national interest. But what is going to be required to be able to meet our future requirements in the electricity sector and probably for other critical infrastructure sectors will likely be both within those that small subset of national interest projects, but a lot of them will be outside of the national interest projects. And so C5 does not address some fundamental problems that we see as a sector with, for example, clean electricity regulations, the Impact Assessment Act, the Fisheries Act, and others. So our concern is really with respect to what isn't covered and what projects that would fall outside of deemed as within the national interest.
Yes, and to your point, I wonder if you might share some of the concerns that your members who are on the front lines of having to deliver affordable, reliable power to residents right across the country, if you might expand on those differences among the provinces, the punitive one-size-fits-all nature of the electricity regulations, and also if you have any comments on the timelines for decisions to date about projects that are waiting for approval.
Sure. Yes. The issues around clean electricity regulations, and we've been very clear over the past year with both officials within the department and with elected officials in terms of what our concerns are. We've been very clear that our concerns have to do with the reliability impacts and the cost in some jurisdictions in the country, most particularly Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, but not exclusively in those jurisdictions. And our concerns are not political, as I keep telling people for the past year. This is a question of physics. It is just basic physics. The clean electricity regulations were developed and based upon economic models. And the people in my sector are responsible for reliability, and their reliability projections are not based upon economic models, they're based upon reliability models. And so the principal concerns that we've been bringing forward are the concerns of the system operators and the people that actually have to deliver electricity to customers. So we see an impact here directly, potentially directly on reliability and on rates in multiple jurisdictions in the country.
This is part of the reason why Conservatives advocate to scrap the electricity regulations, particularly in the context of a government that says it does want to fast track and provide clarity and certainty for proponents like the members that you represent. And so to that end, then, does it concern you, again, that there isn't clarity, as you indicated, around definitions of the national interest, but there's also the ability in C5 for sweeping power to, once a project has been designated the national interest, also remove it? And so does that lack of clarity concern your members in terms of being able to make your long-term decisions?
Well, I mean, the missing piece in all of this in the legislation, and of course, given the short timelines, it's not terribly surprising. Schedule 1 is blank. And so, you know, there's open questions in terms of what would be in Schedule 1, what would be out of Schedule 1, and then whether something remains within the national interest. So yes, those are certainly concerns that we would have. We think directionally, this is good. We're hoping that it actually, as I indicated in my prepared remarks, signals a change and a change that we'll see really throughout the different regulatory authorities, because there's something in the order of about 90 federal laws, regulations, and statutes that actually affect the electricity sector, a sector that is, in theory, a provincial responsibility. But the ability to actually bring a project forward trips over a multitude of all of these different statutes. And so we're hoping that this is a signal of not just addressing what can be done for national interest projects, but indicative of a more efficient approach to regulation going forward.
Would you agree that then what might make more sense, instead of a temporary bill that is set up to be a workaround around the various policies and legislations that your members have to navigate, wouldn't it make more sense, either in this bill to have clarity on Schedule 1, the conditions that proponents must meet, and a definition of the national interest, but also wouldn't it make more sense then just to actually streamline and fix the fundamental issues in terms of the excessive red tape and uncertainty that your members face?
20-second response, please, sir.
Oh.
Sure. Yes, it would be great to see those 90 different statutes, laws, and so on changed. But I think that's not something we would expect to see in the first week of a government. So I recognize that time is short.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bradley, and thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Next, we'll go to Mr. Callaway. Mr. Callaway, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to see the committee members, and thanks to the witnesses for coming here, and acknowledge too that MP May is here as well, and on the right of where I'm sitting here. I want to go to you, Mr. Bradley, in terms of the questions, and I appreciate the testimony up front for everyone, because there's a lot to chew on in terms of questions for you. And we talked about looking at Bill C5 from an economic development standpoint. We even talked about it, I think, from an affordability standpoint, and we'll get into that if I have the time. But I want to look at the workforce modeling that may be done or may have been done by your operation. Do we get a sense of the possibilities in terms of workforce development, in terms of jobs? I come from Atlantic Canada. Obviously, electricity as a source of energy is top of mind with all 4 premiers, and whether it's hydro, whether it's nuclear, whether it's offshore wind or onshore wind. So I'm looking to get a sense of, with this legislation, with this act, do we have a sense of what this could contribute in terms of jobs, short and long term?
Excellent question, Mr. Speaker. The challenge that is being faced by the electricity sector in particular, with respect to ensuring that we have sufficient human resources, is one that both our association and one of our partner associations, Electricity Human Resources Canada, have been looking at. They've been developing projections for what the workforce requirements are going to be in the future, and they're going to be significant. I mentioned earlier that we're expecting to see demand for electricity out to 2050 double. Do we have enough people to be able to do that? No, we don't. Will there be a significant growth in terms of the people in our sector? There absolutely will. But we're very concerned about the sort of the pipeline of talent and ensuring that we have sufficient talent. And so it's something that we've addressed previously, and we do have some recommendations in this space, as does Electricity Human Resources Canada. But I'd also note, related to that, so concerned about the sort of the pipeline of people, also concerned about the pipeline of equipment. Supply chain is a very significant issue, and it will continue to be a big concern for us going forward.
Thanks for those comments, in particular focusing on, I would assume, a need for a training plan, upskilling plan,
yes,
across the country with respect to electricity and other items related to energy. I'm wondering if we can pivot for a second, because it's in the same milieu, of course, but when we're looking at electricity, again, with your modeling and with your conversations in the industry, do we get a sense of, when we scale up with initiatives and projects, how that will impact climate change? How is that going to impact climate change in Canada? And is there any type of modeling that you could provide in terms of prognostications at this point?
Yeah, so our members and the sector is committed and is working towards a net zero economy-wide by 2050, and we recognize that the only way that we would be able to achieve that is through pretty significant electrification to begin with. And so electricity is the sector that a lot of other sectors will be looking to decarbonize. Transportation, for example, how are we going to reduce our emissions in transportation? It, again, will be through electricity, which is why the demand is expected to increase so significantly as we go forward. As a sector, we're looking at, every opportunity and all of the above approach to decarbonize as we head to the future. And there's new technologies that are going to be coming down the track that will continue to see a reduction in emissions. We're at 84% non-emitting today, and that will continue to increase as we move into the future. So the future will be one where it will be a continued decrease in terms of overall emissions from the sector.
We're among friends here. And there's cameras here, so we have some other friends watching as well. I'm wondering, when we talk about large-scale initiatives under the electricity banner, are there particular projects that come to mind? I know regulations come to mind, and that's going to be key here. How do you become lean, but still stringent in terms of due diligence? But are there certain projects that come to mind? I don't want to prejudice any decision-making body, but certainly you have some interest when you look at Canada.
Sure.
And you look at where those opportunities are. Are there certain projects that come to mind that you could share with us?
Well, I can, rather than point to specific projects, I can talk about the classes of projects that we absolutely know will be in our future. Small modular reactors absolutely are in our future. We're going to see the first one coming online in the late 2020s. A number of jurisdictions in this country are actually betting on small modular reactors to be part of their future, as will potentially the traditional nuclear generation, large hydro, small hydro. Potentially even carbon capture as we move forward, and more transmission, and transmission will be critical. So, all of these technologies, including more wind onshore and sometime off into the future, offshore wind will all be part of the energy mix as we head to the future. And there are proponents, in most of these areas. So this is not pie in the sky at this stage. For example, I mentioned small modular reactors. Ontario Power Generation is actively building their SMR. And Saskatchewan is looking very closely, and they want to be next. So these are projects that are already moving forward.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kellaway, and thank you, Mr. Bradley. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcel-Duval.
Up next, we have Mr. Barcel-Duval. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I will start with a question to Mr. Robitaille. In his public remarks, the Prime Minister of Canada mentioned two things. The first is that the projects will not be done without the approval of the provinces or the First Nations, so it will be with them. And the second thing he underlined was that it's important that in the future there is one project, one review. So I'd like to know if these two elements of the rhetoric of the Prime Minister actually are to be found in the bill as it is drafted currently. Well, these elements are not in there. For the first one, the approval of the provinces, while the provinces are consulted with regard to projects that are in the national interest, but it's just a consultation. So the people who drafted the bill maybe didn't do a great job of putting into concrete terms the intentions of the Prime Minister. When they consult the provinces for the designation of these projects, they don't need their consent. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this is not the first time that we're seeing in a federal bill the attempt to have one project, one review. It is laudable. It is something to be approved of, that the provinces are participating in this. But the idea of having one project, one review at the federal level, it doesn't respect Canadian federalism, because there are projects that could be impacted by this bill. These are only exclusively projects in the national interest. So the federal competency, federal jurisdiction projects have to do with the parliament, but those that only involve the provinces should remain within provincial jurisdiction. So the bill seems to want to replace provincial assessments or reviews, but according to constitutional law, this is not possible. Thank you very much. This is indeed very enlightening. Another question that I thought of was the notion, the concept of national interest that is referred to in the bill. When I look at the bill, the definition of the national interest, well, it says a project, the name of whose name appears in Schedule 1. So anything that goes under Schedule 1 of the bill would be designated by the Governor and Council. So based on what you told us, this does not comply with the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in terms of how they see and define a national interest project. So would this create confusion or create two types of national interest projects? Well, it's hard to say whether the intention of the legislator was to create confusion. But when you look at the bill, there is a confusion between a project in the national interest, as it is referred to in the bill, and the notion of the concept of national interest in constitutional law. Well, many years ago, former PM Paul Martin was saying that kindergartens were in the national interest. So the Supreme Court defines this notion clearly, and it should be clearly defined areas, specific, and clearly distinctive of federal jurisdiction, or rather provincial jurisdiction. But the bill as it is doesn't seem to respect these conditions, and there is a high risk that this could be challenged in front of the courts. When you look at the recent jurisprudence that has taken place at the courts. Thank you once again. I don't really have a lot of time, so I'm going to keep asking my questions. You referred to sections 20, 21, and 22 of the bill, which I think are especially worrying because it gives the Governor Council an absolute power of not respecting the bill that is before us or any legislation as soon as we are dealing with a major project. Is this something that you're comfortable with, or do you have comments on that? Yes, certainly. It is worrying, to say the least, because it's a significant concentration of power in the hands of the Governor and Council, and there are environmental legislation at the federal level or the provincial level that includes significant principles of respecting, for instance, biodiversity and protecting species. So it is worrying, to say the least, that almost in one go they can challenge all of this existing legislation. So the bill needs to do a better job of clearly underlining the respect for provincial and currently existing other federal legislation. I don't think I have a lot of time left, Mr. Chair. If I can use my time remaining in the second tour, I'll really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Vasseur-Duval.
We'll begin with Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair and clerks, for organizing this so promptly, and thank you to the witnesses for coming so quickly. We realized the short notice. Mr. Bradley, I'm going to start with you. Of course, we spent a lot of our time on the Building Canada Act, but the first part of the piece of legislation, Bill C-5, is with respect to interprovincial trade. You talked about the 50 different, or 90, should say, pieces of federal legislation. Can you also add in there the provincial part? How many different pieces of, if you know roughly, provincial legislation do electricity providers have to adhere to? And are there conflict of laws or issues, what we would call interprovincial trade barriers, that are affecting your industry as well?
It's an excellent question. It's one for which I don't have a precise answer. To be able to calculate across 10 provinces and 3 territories all of the different laws and statutes that impact the electricity sector would be certainly a challenge.
So would it be helpful to your industry if, in fact, government officials from all provinces as well as the federal government came together and either had a system of mutual recognition or a harmonization of those regulations? Would that be of benefit, and would that provide economic benefits for Canadians?
Yes.
Thank you. So maybe that's something we could have had included in Bill C-5. Is that fair?
Well, as I said earlier, I recognize that the time is short. There'd be a lot of, as I said, lots of things that I'd like to see addressed. But you know, at the same time, I must say I'm certainly heartened by the openness. We seem to be at a particular point in time right now where there is an openness in provincial capitals and here in Ottawa to look at ways to collaborate more closely and to reduce trade barriers. Certainly, things that would be of benefit to the sector right across the board. Whether it's a recognition of credentials in the trades to making it simpler to trade across borders.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I think this is an incredible moment, and I think that the government, by taking very limited steps on interprovincial trade, is sort of missing the moment. But I'll move on to the Building Canada Act. So one of the worries that I might have is that the government's actually not going to list enough projects to be national interest projects to actually make an impact. I know that you wouldn't have exact numbers, but as much as you can, give us what you would think would be a win in terms of the amount of project within your industry would be approved by the government. Would that be $500 million worth? Would it be $1 billion? Would it be $500 billion? What type of numbers would you hope to see being classified as national interest projects within your industry?
Yeah, so we don't have a number, and we're again, because this is fairly early days in terms of the legislation. We don't have a clear indication of how expansive that list may be. We do know that the investments that are going to be required in this sector, out to 2050 are in the order of $1.7 trillion. And so the investments are going to be very significant. But I don't have a number in terms of what we would want to see included in national interest projects.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. And I'm going to ask you, Ms. Kokonos, if I've got that right, the same question.
Yeah, so this is something that came up during our consultations, actually. And at the time, we talked about 15 to 20 projects. And it's not really about the value. I think it's about the number. And, the public service is going to have to rethink this process, almost reverse engineer it, taking into account this 2-year window. And there's a lot to consider, a lot to work through with the provinces. So I would recommend like a manageable number. 15 to 20 is what we talked about during our consultations. And we're going to learn a lot through this first wave of projects that is going to inform future projects, but also we want it to inform the regulatory process for all projects going forward in the future. And they want to set themselves up to succeed, right? So if you overshoot, you could be setting yourself up for failure.
Just quickly, because I'm out of time here. When you say 50 to 20 projects, you mean
15 to 20.
15 to 20
yes.
projects, sorry, by the end of the year, is that, or what's the time frame then?
No, that would be to approve them up front within, the next few months, and then they'd have the 2-year window.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kokonos, and thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Next, prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lauzon. À vous la parole. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being with us in person or online. I'm going to continue with you, Ms. Kokinos. Now, you were at the helm of many projects at the intergovernmental level. You have demonstrated your experience. Could you tell us if the C5 would have made things easier back in the day between the provinces and the territories, of course, but we haven't really spoken much about municipalities that will also be impacted at 3 levels of government, including Indigenous peoples as well. So the harmonization of all of this, how could you define the harmonization that C5 will give us in future projects?
Thank you very much for the question. So what C5 tries to do is to bring all authorizations under one minister. But, it's not a unilateral thing. That minister, the governor and council, I think they call them, is going to have to consult with the provinces, with the territories involved in the specific projects, with the Indigenous communities or rights holders involved in the specific projects. It may also be municipalities. These things are not going to be undertaken in a vacuum, is how I read the bill. But what I do like about it is we have some thinking outside of the box, because the moment calls for it. We can no longer think about project approvals the way we used to think about them. And there's real momentum right now that we're seeing with the provinces and the territories and Indigenous rights holders all coming together, wanting to work collaboratively to move these projects forward, because it won't happen any other way. It really won't.
Monsieur Bradley nous a parlé du délai.
Mr. Bradley talked about the delays and the periods of time that are needed for projects. So, with regard to the environment and projects that touch the environment, so shorter periods, could they have an impact? Would we still be able to implement the projects in the right manner, in more reasonable timelines, but with all due attention to the environmental aspect?
C5 is that all the environmental protections that are currently in place will still be adhered to. The idea is to look at what process improvements we can make to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, whether we can do things in parallel, for example, not sequentially, but the idea is not to circumvent any environmental laws. That's how I interpret the bill, and that's the way it's going to have to happen, I believe.
Dans ces projets, Madame Coquino.
Because, Ms. Coquinos, in this bill, there is a lot of overlapping of jurisdictions. At every level, there are many people who get involved in these projects, and often in these sorts of projects, there's repetition. And when you take a project through its term, again, Mr. Bradley talked about an office for major projects. So having an office for major projects and having specific coordination for these projects, all the projects that are in the national interest, if this was to be, well, you didn't really talk about the major projects bureau or office, but do you think that this would be a good idea with full respect for the environment and the stakeholders, whether it's, again, Indigenous populations, municipalities, the provinces and the territories, and the federal level?
Thank you. Yes, the Major Projects Office is something that we talked about during our consultations. We see it as critically important. The government will need a focal point to coordinate these projects. But where we would see the government going further with this office is to also integrate the financing components, the critical enabling infrastructure components, and Indigenous consultation and economic participation components. You can't have those scattered around the office. It would have been a missed opportunity to have those outside the office. Our experience has been with projects like LNG Canada, which did bring all those four components together right from the beginning, including the financing. It actually led to the project being approved in 2 years, and the financing was also approved very quickly.
Thank you once again, Ms. Coquinos, et merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lauzon. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Next up, we'll go to Mr. Barcelou-Duval. You have the floor. 3 minutes and 15 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question, again, to Mr. Robitaille. You are a constitutional expert, if I'm not mistaken, but you are an attorney by training as well. So, in the process that's before us as part of Bill C5, we see that projects will be pre-approved without public consultation, prior public consultation. So there's a certain level of secrecy. and then assessments or reviews are done, but you already know ahead of time that the project will be approved. So it's up to the government and the minister, depending on the conditions they put out. So it is quite hidden, quite opaque, because in a normal, regular process, there are different instances, different offices who come into play. But here there is one review by one organism. Is there an ethical issue here as well? Well, there is a risk of not respecting environmental legislation of the provinces, but also acts or laws adopted by the Parliament with regard to the environmental issues. Mr. Lauzon was referring to repetition that exists in Canadian federalism. That is true, but we cannot think about removing the provinces from the equation altogether. The Supreme Court has made this clear at numerous occasions. The provinces also have exclusive jurisdiction in some areas, but we don't see this in the bill, the intention to respect the sharing of the jurisdictions. In rare cases, there have been examples of such initiatives, but in all of these, the provincial levels and the Indigenous communities were treated as equal partners, and this is not really something we see in this bill. Thank you. That didn't fully answer the question I asked, but I understand that you wanted to come back on that point. So you referred to projects that are 100% limited within the boundaries of a province that could potentially be referred to as national interest projects. But in natural resources, there are projects of this sort. But from the get-go, this bill would be open to pre-approving these projects and overstepping, as a result, provincial competence or jurisdiction. Yes, this is indeed what we see. We are skipping over public participation, citizen participation, First Nations or municipalities' participation. In environmental legislation, there are these processes in place for this reason specifically. So by wanting to go too fast, yes, there is a risk that the projects will be done, but there will be consequences. Thank you, Mr. Robitaille. Thank you, Mr. Vasseur-Duval.
The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, Mr. Bradley, you spoke of the importance of electricity. Do you have an opinion on the electricity grid capacity and whether that we have sufficient electricity infrastructure to even facilitate Bill C-5?
I don't think there's a requirement for electricity capacity specifically for Bill C-5, but it will remain to be seen whether projects that will build upon the electricity infrastructure of the country are in fact covered and identified as national interest projects. We're certainly hoping that some of them will be.
And if I may just turn to Ms. Kokinos, you spoke of a 2-year time limit. Are you getting that from the bill, or is that something that you are just speaking to in general?
In our report, Build Big Things, we did recommend a 2-year regulatory and permitting approvals timeline. The government has committed to a 2-year timeline outside of the bill, so it has chosen not to legislate this.
So it's not in the bill?
It's not in the bill,
okay.
But it is a government commitment outside the bill.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to go back and forth. Back to you, Mr. Bradley. Would you see resource projects like oil and gas extraction being in the national interest under Bill C-5?
I'm here representing the electricity sector, so I'm only going to be talking to electricity projects. My colleagues that work for the oil and gas associations, I'm sure, have strong views in that.
Okay. Well, I can ask the constitutional expert. Back to you, Ms. Kokinos. With respect to strategic investment officer, I found that very interesting that you spoke about that. Now, would something like that include a watchdog for tenders and deliverables? Because we had a lot of problems during COVID with respect to waste and mismanagement. Do you see the transparency in that office as something that needs to be developed and perhaps operationalized?
The real benefit of a strategic investment office and coordinating the financing is that it is really going to allow the government to optimize its federal spend on any particular project, because they're going to be able to align the best type of funding with for a particular project. So you won't have, for example, project proponents going to window A with their proposal, window B or window C, and trying to see, for example, how much federal funding they could get. It would allow through probably NDAs, for example, that's what we would envisage, the federal government to work with the proponent to look to see exactly what is it that's going to unlock that final investment decision for a project, with a view to minimizing how much the federal government has to invest in a project. So there are real opportunities here.
Thank you for that answer. And my next question is for Mr. Robitaille. Who determines if a project is in the national interest? And keeping in mind the constitutional implications under Section 91 and 92?
It depends on what we mean by national interest. If we mean national interest in the constitutional sense, it shall be the court, the tribunals. The parliament made the first judgment, and they adopt a law that they think is valid under the national doctrine, the national consent doctrine in constitutional law, but it's ultimately to the court to determine that if the constitution is respected.
So essentially you're saying that this bill is a constitutionally invalid bill.
It's at risk to be declared invalid. It's up to the court to make a judgment on that point, but there are some risks. Yes.
Would you see, in your opinion, would a resource project like an oil and gas extraction be in the national interest, as you spoke about in Section 7?
Oh, it's a political decision to be made. It's not up to me to decide if an extraction project is in the national interest. But what I could say is that an extraction project is clearly within provincial jurisdiction under the Constitution.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Et merci beaucoup, Monsieur Robitaille.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robitaille. And we have Mr.
Thanks very much. Thank you to the clerk for pulling this together in such quick speed, and a huge thank you to the three witnesses who have joined us today. I want to ask my first question to Ms. Kokonos. Thanks for sharing your time and expertise with the committee today, and bringing your particular experience across energy, trade, and public policy as we examine this bill. In Part 2 of the Building Canada Act preamble, we do reference rigorous environmental standards. As we're hearing feedbacks from constituents, I'd like to know what kinds of evaluation criteria might we put in place to ensure that the projects meaningfully align with our climate commitments?
Thank you very much for the question. I think, I'm not a regulatory expert, but any project that goes through the regulatory process, if I understand Bill C-5, is going to have to adhere to all our environmental regulations. And in terms of adhering to our climate change commitments, the types of projects that are selected are going to be very important. As Mr. Bradley mentioned, things like expanding our electricity grid, integrating renewables into the grid, technologies like SMRs, small modular reactors, nuclear. These are the types of projects that are going to help us reach our climate commitments. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'm going to ask a question now to Mr. Bradley, sort of following on that. We have kind of identified in the legislation that we want to be moving towards clean growth and climate objectives as part of the key criteria for the nation-building projects. Any thoughts or further comment on how this is helping us accelerate the development of the clean energy infrastructure in Canada that we'd like to see?
Yeah, as I noted before, the pathway from here to there is going to be one that will have more of an all of the above approach, and so that is again what we're hoping to see when we see what projects are covered in Schedule 1.
Thanks. That's it for my questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nguyen. That concludes the first hour of testimony for today. I would like to thank our witnesses, Monsieur Bradley, Ms. Kokinos, and of course, Monsieur Robitaille. Appreciate your testimony. We're going to suspend for 5 minutes in order to set up for the next round of witnesses. This meeting is suspended. Back to order. We'd like to begin this panel with a prayer given to us by Chief Ted Williams. Appreciate your presence here today, sir. I'll turn the floor over to you to get us started.
Tobacco, and I accept the responsibility and the honor of opening with prayer. Creator, we give thanks for this opportunity to be together as friends of this great land. We ask that you be with us, that you guide us, that you look after us, so that we will look after the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the gigon who swim in our ocean, in our rivers, in our lakes. We ask that you be kind to each and every one. We come with respect and compassion as the first peoples of this land. I want to say, miigwech in the four directions. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you very much, Chief Williams. Greatly appreciated, miigwech. Colleagues, to begin the second round of questioning for today, I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of our new witnesses. Kindly wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For those joining by Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can see selection materials where you can select the appropriate channel for the interpretation, either the floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Colleagues, I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. First, from the Assembly of First Nations, we have Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanak, National Chief. Welcome to you. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of numerous other chiefs representing First Nations communities across the country, and thank you very much for your presence here today. Second, from the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada, we have Ms. Catherine Swift, President, who's joining us by video conference. We're hoping to work out some of the audio technical issues that we're having, colleagues. Hopefully we can get those worked out. Until that time, we will not be posing any questions to Ms. Swift. And third, as an individual, we have Maxime Saint-Hilaire, Professor, Faculty of Law, Université de Sherbrooke. Welcome to you. We'll begin with opening remarks, and for that, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to you, National Chief. You have 5 minutes, please.
Chimigwech, I want to welcome you, of course, and thank the recognize that we're on the Anishinaabe Algonquin territory on whose lands we're on. Chimigwech to Chief Ted for your opening prayer. I wish, and I want to welcome all of the First Nations people that are here that are sitting behind me, and you know why they're here. They want to speak, and they want to speak to each and every one of you. And I think that we can do better as a country together by doing so. I wish I was here also to talk to you. We want to talk about fast-tracking things in our country. And I wish we were here talking about the construction of modern schools for First Nations children. We've been waiting a long time for the First Nations infrastructure gap to close. And you've seen the reports on the Conference Board of Canada on closing the infrastructure gap in this country and how progressive Canada can be by investing in First Nations people. And it would propel us. We're in the midst of a G7 meeting as we speak right now. And we're at Canada's ranked a little bit at the bottom of the G7 country. And if we invested in closing that infrastructure gap, we would propel ourselves to number one. And so I leave that with you. I also wish we were here talking about fast-tracking clean water and quality housing for First Nations people, or fast-tracking all-season roads and reliable internet access for our kids. But we're not, and that's a shame. Yesterday, the Assembly of First Nations convened an emergency forum on Bill C-5. The forum was the first opportunity that First Nations leaders have had to get a technical analysis of this bill. We have heard from multiple chiefs across this country that this is not how we should be moving forward on this legislation, that we all need more time and opportunity to speak to this legislation and get answers to our questions. In the absence of a specific resolution mandate to speak to you on Bill C-5, as is the usual practice for the Assembly of First Nations, I speak to you today on an emergency basis, relying on the AFN's Charter General assignment of the National Chief as, quote, national spokesperson, and without prejudice to the rights of any First Nations rights holder, particularly these ones, everybody from coast to coast. They have their own voices, they have their own ways of doing things, and we need to respect them. Bill C-5 is one of the most significant federal bills that First Nations have had to deal with in recent years. The powers in Bill C-5 are significant and present substantial risk to many collective rights of First Nations under our own laws, under the Constitution, and under international law. Accordingly, the Crown has obligations of deep consultation and consent. Perhaps there is information that they haven't shared with us about that. For now, I point out the United Nations Declaration is replete with references to consultation being carried out through their own representative institutions. Individuals appointed by the government are not clearly representatives of Indigenous peoples on matters of our treaty and inherent rights, title, and jurisdiction. In the May 27th speech from the throne, the Crown stated, as Canada moves forward with nation-building projects, the government will always be firmly guided by the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Despite this clear commitment communicated by the sovereign himself, First Nations rights holders and organizations have been given an unreasonably tiny window, both before and after tabling, much less engage in a substantive exchange of views. It seems very few rights holders will have a chance to speak directly to the executive or to parliamentarians before Parliament determines the fate and shape of this bill. For those that do appear, how can any First Nations rights holder or organization even list the legal issues at stake in 5 minutes, much less share analysis and conclusions about the key issues? This means the Crown is ignoring decades of judicial guidance on what deep consultation involves when First Nations rights are placed at substantive risk. The Crown is ignoring its consent obligation under Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In short, the honor of the Crown is not being upheld, friends. Deep consultation involves a two-way exchange of information sharing accompanied by substantive dialogue. It is more than merely inviting First Nations rights holders to speak for 5 minutes or to make written submissions from a distance. Consultation is not the Crown simply listening and going away and deciding on its own without dialogue, without a back and forth on its content and scope of First Nations rights and corresponding Crown obligations under the Constitution, treaty, and international law. The Crown only provided information on the exact details of this bill on June 6, 2025, after providing a very limited outline on May 23rd. We were given 7 days to respond. As we sit here today, excuse me, the world of 34 First Nations is literally burning up because of human-induced climate change. There is no respite for those affected First Nations, their chiefs, their councillors to provide input or to consult with the Crown on this bill, unless they can work the magic of getting on your witness list and preparing and delivering a submission to you, while simultaneously protecting themselves during these evacuations that are happening across the country. They are expected to absorb the fallout of the new normal of June evacuations of entire communities and the desire of Canada to impose still more significant legislation without even a conversation, much less consent. Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration applies the legal standard of free, prior, and informed consent to legislative initiatives before they are adopted. Free, prior, and informed consent is Latin with substantive meaning. It has a common sense meaning that everyone understands. For example, a medical doctor, for instance, is not free to operate merely because they have spoken to a patient about the need for an operation. They must literally obtain the patient's explicit consent. Too often, words applied to Indigenous people's rights are taken to mean something different than their ordinary everyday meaning. I would like to highlight some areas that can be improved in this bill. First, subsection 5.6 lists a number of factors that the Governor and Council may consider when designating a project as a national interest project. The 5 factors in subsection 5.6 should be mandatory for any project to be designated as a national interest project. Second, subsection 5.6d should make the free, prior, and informed consent of First Nations mandatory when considering whether a project will advance the interest of Indigenous peoples. Sorry. Julie, I'm sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties. Give me a moment. What's going on here? Yeah, okay. Where is that? Where is it? Okay.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Yes, Ms. Kazan.
She's having technical, are you done? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want you to know, Chief, we have not removed any of your time. You feel free to
Thank
take
you.
your time delivering your remarks.
Thank you. All right, so second, subsection 5.6d should make the free, prior, and informed consent of First Nations mandatory when considering whether a project will advance the interest of Indigenous peoples. Third, to limit the effect of First Nations rights, there are several provisions that can be added or amended to protect First Nations properly. Unfortunately, we haven't had the time to properly engage in legislative drafting of this bill to ensure First Nations rights are upheld. Fourth, the Indian Act should not be unilaterally varied or exempted without the express consent of First Nations. The Indian Act should be removed from Schedule 2. Finally, with regard to the Indigenous Advisory Council, the government keeps talking about as if some kind of answer to its consultation obligation is quite puzzling. An advisory council of government appointees, even if they're First Nations or Indigenous, cannot constitute an entity of which the government can carry out consultation on behalf of First Nations. The government should know better than to suggest that they think otherwise. Just to close off, the right to self-determination of First Nations is an established right. Canada has repeatedly acknowledged that it is in a policy and international statements and by its statutory and unqualified embrace of the Declaration in the United Nations Declaration Act. Free, prior, and informed consent and First Nations permanent sovereignty are part of the right to self-determination, which is also part of customary international law that is legally binding in Canada. Regardless of the colonial mindset of the Indian Act, the one useful thing it does do is incorporate the requirements and protection of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. This treatment of the Indian Act cannot be imposed on us without violating the Royal Proclamation, as well as our Section 35 rights and the United Nations Declaration. Any legislation proposing or allowing such is not consistent with the Constitution or the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Chimigwech for listening to me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, National Chief Woodhouse Nipanak, for your opening remarks. Next, we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Maxime Saint-Hilaire. À vous la parole. Vous avez 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you. My speech will quickly cover my interpretation of the bill and identify, in light of best practices globally in this field, some shortcomings, and quickly also present amendments that, in my opinion, would be welcome. I wouldn't be able to go into the details of these amendments, but I can give you the gist of them. So overall, the bill that is before us, C5, an act to enact the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act and the Build in Canada Act. Well, it allows the executive branch to remove some powers from, and to a large extent, when it comes to projects of its own choosing. So they can take these projects from outside the scope of the applicable legislation. So it's an exceptional power. We are going beyond the customary powers and authorities. And the bill envisages these exceptional powers. Now, it's also a bill that, and I will come back to this in a minute, the 5-year limit does not apply to the powers covered by the bill, or at least the main powers. So for the government to refer to a project as being in the national interest. So the first one, exceptional powers, and the second, the time limit is not applying, and the third is the current procedure. The bill is being adopted in an accelerated manner with a gag order. So this bill is an emergency bill. It is not a bill that seeks to implement federal jurisdiction in an urgent manner, but it intervenes in provincial jurisdiction. My colleague, Professor Robitaille, referred to this point as well. I believe that the current bill envisages a derogation to federal legislation, but it doesn't explicitly envisage to intervene in provincial legislation, but it's still an emergency piece of legislation because it seeks to set aside other pieces of legislation that normally preserve public interest. Now, modern countries where the rule of law apply applies, they have to be able to respond to emergency situations. That is true. And it is also true that it's usually the executive branch of the government that takes these decisions, and there's a political cost to doing so, but it is a responsibility of the executive branch nonetheless to decide if it's an emergency situation or not. And the Canadian constitutional jurisprudence and many other countries also recognize this. And here, at least in Canada, it's since 1976 that emergencies can be of economic nature. Having said that, when we look at the best practices in this field in modern countries with the rule of law, they converge on having emergency powers, but having these coupled with parliamentary scrutiny. Yes, you should be able to respond to an emergency situation with exceptional powers. And yes, in a situation like that, judicial control is reduced, but in exchange, the emergency has to remain within the limits of the law, so the need for parliamentary supervision in exercising these emergency powers. But when you look at the Emergency Powers Act, the bill is exemplary, and the government wouldn't have been able to govern for as long as they did without the Parliament had the act been implemented. That's a bit of a paradox because there is a higher level of parliamentary scrutiny. So now I would like to talk about some amendments that I would like to see moved. The bill that's before us needs to accept that all the exceptional powers that it confers to the executive branch cannot be used or should not be used beyond the 5 years, the 5-year period. And I also don't think that these powers should be used when Parliament is resolved or prorogued. And then the use of the emergency measures should be done in a transparent manner, and this should be stated more clearly that these are emergency powers, because one of the issues that modern liberal democracies have is the continued state of emergency and normalizing the exception. So public authorities tend to blur the lines between what's normal and what's an exception. And here, in my opinion, the bill refers to a disguised emergency situation, if you will. Now, that might be normal, and it's up to elected officials to deliberate on that. There is a political debate to be had on that, but for that debate to take place, the emergency should be acknowledged and made public. Mr. Saint-Hilaire, I will have to cut you off there. Unfortunately, you are out of your time for your opening remarks, but you might have more time in the question and answer rounds. Thank you.
Swift. We are going to test her sound during her opening remarks, and I'll look to my interpreters to make sure that the sound is good for them. If it's not, unfortunately, Ms. Swift, we're going to have to ask you to submit your remarks by email and perhaps another brief if you so choose to do so. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to you, ma'am. You have 5 minutes. Sarah, you're just on mute. We're going to have to ask you to unmute and then restart, please. I'll make sure that you don't lose any of your time.
I thought you would unmute me, given government control and all that. Yes, hello. My name is Catherine Swift. I'm the president of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada. We're a not-for-profit business organization that advocates
Ms. Swift, my sincere apologies to have to cut you off one more time. Can I just ask you to lift the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? We're having a bit of a hard time here.
Certainly. How's that?
I think that's much better, ma'am. Please continue.
Excellent. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll repeat myself then. My name's Catherine Swift. I'm president of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses Canada. We're a group of a lot of manufacturers, but not exclusively. And we are an advocacy organization that supports solid economic policy, relatively small government, and good use of taxpayer dollars. With regard to this bill, first of all, I know a lot of other people have said that, but I just want to reinforce the consultation period has been too brief. This is an enormously powerful bill, and it needs more consideration than it's been given. Basically, the second part of the bill gives the Liberals the ability to override a number of very important pieces of legislation that they themselves put in place over the last decade or so. So it seems a little ironic, I guess, that suddenly this very liberal collection of legislation, now they want the power to override. What I think would be preferable if the legislation in place, things like the emissions cap on the oil and gas industry, of course, the industrial carbon tax in particular, the tanker ban in northern BC, and even such proposed things as a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which has been discussed. It would be better to remove these things or not introduce them in the first place, it seems to me, rather than give this power to override it. And the main reason is because we know investment has plummeted in Canada, foreign and domestic, over the last decade because of bad policies that have discouraged investment and created uncertainty. Why not get rid of these pieces of legislation? If I was an investor, I'd be saying, okay, they've got the power to override, and yet all those legislative initiatives stay on the books. Why not just get rid of them if they're so problematic, not just override them or give yourselves the power to override them occasionally? Another issue is the potential for massive spending. We know infrastructure is hugely expensive. Massive spending of tax dollars in the way that this Liberal government has spent in the last decade on Liberal friends and cronies, and the very visible incompetence of the federal bureaucracy to spend taxpayer dollars efficiently. And I know there's a million examples of that, ArriveCan being one of the most recent scandalous ones, but there were many, many examples, especially during the pandemic when money flowed like water and very little was often produced for it. The wording of the bill is often also too vague. Others have brought this up as well. Dominic LeBlanc, given primacy in terms of decision-making power, he's been a member of the Liberal government for the last decade and presumably supported the introduction of lots of the legislation that this bill is intended to override. So this does not inspire confidence in the business community. I also think that the secretive nature, the rushing this through so quickly, only have the House sitting for a few weeks, then taking the summer off, the secretive nature of this gives people great number of concerns. And things like in the past, the Green Slush Fund, the election interference issue, the WE fiasco. There's a whole lot of problems that this government and many of the people elected today were members of that government. There's no trust. And rushing this through does not help the matter at all. I think the 5-year sunset period is too brief for a bill that permits the enormous powers to any government, whoever they may happen to be. And I think the bill should be split into two parts. The interprovincial trade stuff is a very different kettle of fish and something that's very supported by the business community compared to the second part of the bill with respect to changing the powers of the government. And we are very supportive as an organization of getting on with projects that are going to help our economy enormously and get out of the hole it's been in for the last decade, which is abysmal, what's been happening with our economy in Canada, but also boost the standard of living for average Canadians. But this shouldn't mean having to give any government the kind of poorly defined, loose powers that we see in C5. We need pipelines. We need oil and gas pipelines in this country to develop our wealth of oil and gas resources. If there was one policy that this government could do, which would have the fastest impact on boosting our economy and getting ourselves out of the doldrums that we've been in for so long, it would be build pipelines, export our natural gas, notably liquid natural gas. And the irony is that would also enormously help the world economy, as the less developed countries would be able to get off more polluting sources of energy. And since the Liberal government seems to be in a big hurry, only sitting for 3 weeks during this period now, and having very little consultation on such a great big bill, we need to prioritize the oil and gas sector if they really want something that will have impact as quickly as possible and as massively as possible, and not something like, say, an electricity grid corridor across the country that would greatly increase power to Canadians and would also be very, very difficult to achieve and have unreliable energy sources. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Swift, for your opening remarks. We'll now begin with our...
Point of order?
Yes, Ms. Kazan.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask for unanimous consent to grant me time at the end of committee to be able to ask questions.
Do I have unanimous consent from the members of the committee to grant a certain amount of time?
Maybe the
Mr.
last
Lazar?
round, we could just take 3 minutes again, but not 5 minutes, and give her, let's spare the time with her. So we have like a round of 5 minutes. We just give her like 6 minutes.
I think that's okay. What I would say is we just would add 5 minutes at the end, 3 minutes to Ms.
Minutes, 3
Gazan,
minutes,
and then 2 minutes to Miss May. If
Yeah,
if
2
she
minutes,
wants.
Miss May, and
Give my 2 minutes to Ms. Kazan.
yeah.
So maybe just add 5 minutes at the end.
Just share
I
the
don't want
time
to take
with
away
them.
from time, but I've got an extra 5 minutes tonight. So
Thank you.
I think we have unanimous consent, Ms. Kazan,
Great,
so we'll be
thank
sure
you.
to give you 5 minutes.
And very kind of you, thank you.
Thank you for being so accommodating, colleagues. We'll begin our line of questioning in this round with Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Ted, for your opening prayer. Thank you, National Chief Woodhouse, for being here, and to all of the witnesses. I'm certainly proud to work with the Indigenous communities in Treaty 6, and the issues that you talked about at the beginning that you would like to see fast-tracked do align with the leaders of the 5 First Nations and 4 Métis settlements that I work with there. You noted that your first opportunity to have a technical briefing on the bill was yesterday, and you did touch on this, but I wonder if you would expand on your concerns about the ability for a cabinet to temporarily override provisions of the Indian Act or others, if you want to touch on through regulation without consultation or consent with First Nations.
Absolutely. I don't know. There's no other way to describe it, I think, but thank you for your question. Take the Impact Assessment Act, Section 115. It only allows non-application of the Act for reasons related to national security or in instances where the Emergency Act is invoked. And this Act, C5, goes far beyond this Emergencies Act clause in the Impact Assessment Act, with none of the safeguard contained in the Emergencies Act related to transparency and parliamentary oversight. It is project approval by executive decree, with any act or any regulation able to set aside by the cabinet. And I think if I don't know if Julie's with me, she's my technical person at the Assembly of First Nations Legal Brain. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, Miigwech, we are concerned specifically with the provisions, Section 19 to 21, which are the so-called Henry VIII clauses, the overriding of the ability of cabinet to have the discretion to override important legislation to First Nations, specifically the Indian Act. We've not been advised what the intention was for the ability to override the Indian Act. We weren't consulted on why that was included in Schedule 2, and we're left to only, speculate on what the intentions are of the government with respect to the Indian Act. The Indian Act, governs a lot of administrative issues with First Nations, but it also deals with land, reserve lands. So we very much want to know what the legislative intention is behind that.
Thank you. And also, it's partly clear why ministers should come to committee to testify on this bill, since they're also decision makers, and it's their obligation and their duty to consult with First Nations. I wonder then if you might, Chief Woodhouse, you yourself have been a strong proponent of opportunities for ownership and partnership, and certainly the communities in Lakeland are owners and producers in both traditional and clean energy. And given the diversity of views, of values, aspirations, ambitions of the more than 600 First Nations right across Canada. I wonder if you might, for the benefit of the MPs here and Canadians, talk a little bit about rights and title holders and the duty to consult rights and title holders, and what meaningful two-way dynamic consultation would actually look like to you.
Absolutely. First of all, I think just on C5, there's many chiefs behind me that should be speaking about this, and some chiefs are supportive of the economic development opportunities that this bill may provide, while others are absolutely against it. And I think the main issue I'm hearing in this bill, is it being rammed through without consultation of First Nations, free, prior, and informed consent. And I think if I can look to all of you, I'll have Julie expand a little more on that. But split this bill, send the bill back for further study, and allow First Nations rights holders to attend these hearings so that they can hear directly. You can hear directly from them about their rights, about their title, about their communities, and about their ways of life. And I think that this country, we're at a pivotal moment here. And it's always been, especially First Nations, we're the only people around the entire world that are legislated under the Indian Act. No other group, Inuit, Métis, nobody else has to, is legislated the way that our people are legislated in the entire world. At the same time, that comes with, the history of this country has not always been kind to First Nations. And in this moment, it seems like we've made some progress over the years. We've tried to come together in a better way. We've tried to come together at different tables. You see some communities progressing and others that are, trying to find their way through the basics of making sure their children have the basics. And there's this huge infrastructure gap. But at the same time, when you come to this moment and you ram bills through this House and you don't take into account the timing, and I've told the Prime Minister this, I've told the ministers this, and I continue to encourage all of you to split this bill and give it, let's take a little break for a little while and allow for proper consultation with First Nations. I don't want to speak for rights holders. I don't have that mandate. And, we will be meeting in September, 3, 4, and 5, and I look forward to hearing from my chiefs then and getting specifics on what I can and cannot say at that point. And at the same time, I think you all have an opportunity this summer to go out to our communities and talk to our leadership and our First Nations people from coast to coast to coast in your territories. All of you have First Nations in your territories. Again, congratulations on all of you becoming new MPs just moments ago. But let's not start this session off like this. Let's start it off on a better way by respecting each other and working together more closely rather than dividing and having a very divided Canada in a moment when we need to be together. First Nations have always pulled for this country, but at the same time, pushing us aside and not allowing voices at this table to be heard is not the way to go with this bill. So I ask you, split this bill, hold it for the summer, allow for proper consultation with our nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, National Chief, and thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Next, we'll turn the floor to Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes for your line of questioning, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for being here, National Chief. Thank you to the other witnesses. Thank you to the other chiefs and leaders in the room today. It's an honor for me to be speaking with you in my first time in an in-person committee meeting here in the Parliament of Canada. National Chief, if I may, I'd like to ask you, given, as you pointed out, the limited amount of time that's been made available for First Nations and other Indigenous peoples to speak to the contents of this Act, I wondered if we could discuss a little bit some of the ways in which the provisions might be improved in light of the comments that you've made. You observed that Section 5(6)D of the Act could be strengthened by including the language around free, prior, and informed consent being a mandatory component for First Nations, kind of a step above the idea of consultation. I'm wondering whether you would feel similarly that including language around free, prior, and informed consent elsewhere in the bill, notably Sections 7(2)C and 8(3)B, might similarly strengthen the language and the commitment to ensuring not just consultation, but free, prior, and informed consent from Indigenous peoples. Would changes along those lines start down the path of addressing the concerns that you've raised today? Welcome your thoughts on that.
I'll say this, I don't have specific amendments. I do as I do not have a mandate from Chiefs in Assembly to provide a position on how this bill can be amended. However, I will say that you should hear from First Nations rights holders directly, and I will say, however, that we are concerned about Cabinet's absolute power to determine what are projects of national interest based on what Cabinet thinks is in the best interest of First Nations. We are also concerned that Cabinet can unilaterally choose that laws don't apply, like the Impact Assessment Act, and we are concerned of what the duty to consult and the United Nations Declaration are not operationalized within the bill. And we are concerned about the Indian Act's inclusion in Schedule 2 of the bill, and it should be taken out. I think those are just generally what we've heard from chiefs across the country on Monday, our Monday discussion, but at the same time, they need time to get their lawyers to review things, their policy analysts, their traditional people in their communities and their elders and their youth, and they haven't had that time. And many of them are still fighting fires. They haven't even had probably time to even look at this act. And I don't know, Julie, if you have anything further to add to that.
No, I think National Chief has captured it quite well. And the fact that, I know you're referring to 72C, about Indigenous peoples whose rights recognized and affirmed by Section 35 with respect to issuing of the document. You need to go back to the rights holders to find out their rights that are being affected. So that's where FPIC needs to be applied. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, but you just touched on it again there, National Chief, as you did at the beginning of your statement, the context of the fires currently raging across much of central Canada, much of the prairie, the context of the climate crisis that we are living in. And so, the urgency around some of the shift towards a cleaner energy economy and trying to remove some of the sources of our contributions to degrading the natural environment. In that context, combined with the context that you noted about the ongoing lack of critical infrastructure in many First Nations communities, the desperate need for continued investment in housing and schooling and other kind of essential services in many parts of this country. I wonder if you could speak to how either you or the chiefs that you work so closely with feel about the possibilities that projects of national importance as outlined in this bill might be a way of accelerating the pace at which we can address those challenges, separate from the questions around consultation that you've very clearly spoken to, but whether the projects themselves might be a means by which we could accelerate the rate at which those challenges for Indigenous communities are addressed.
Thank you for the question. And I don't think we should be reliant on, there's been projects in this country since the creation of this country, right? And what has that benefited First Nations people when our little kids are without drinking water, our little children are without proper homes and access to good, strong schools? We need a lot of schools built in our First Nations communities across this country. So trying to wait for some project over here that hasn't worked in the past, it's not, if that worked so well, why is it not working for First Nations people in this country? And I think that we're at a moment right now, I get it, a very important moment right now where we can try and change our future. But that doesn't happen by keeping our people without having a voice to say, this is what we need. This is how we can change our country together. And I think that by saying, oh, here, look, maybe we'll have a project here, and maybe you'll get a school, or maybe you'll get a house. I don't think that's the way that we want to go. And I think that trying to assume that because we're going to get all these big interest projects that all of a sudden First Nations are going to have all these things, I think our people would, beg to differ on that based on past history. And so I think that we do have an opportunity here to really rethink on how this country is with First Nations people, but let's have that conversation. We ask all of Cabinet, all members of Parliament, as well as with the Prime Minister, come and meet with our people face to face, and let's dialogue about this summer. I've been telling the Prime Minister that he has committed to meeting with our leadership across this country, and these are the conversations that we do have to have on environment, on how to make our country a better place for everyone, including First Nations people. We're left out of the banking system, for instance. We have to get ministerial loan guarantees just to ask for support in some of our communities. And, things are, people always, out of sight, out of mind. Well, we're here now, and we're becoming stronger and more organized, and status quo is not good enough anymore. And talking about projects that maybe that would accelerate things, maybe not. But I think we need to ask the rights holders that, and they need a seat at this table, just like anybody else. And I think by ramming this through, you're also follow your own laws. I also say, you're trampling on the rights and of laws of many other Canadians as well. They need a voice, and they need to make laws that comes through this House better for everybody. And that means that we make sure that we make space for each other and we respect each other. And this isn't a way to respect each other. We don't need more colonialism when we have Trump's colonialism at our borders. And ramming something through is not the way to go. So thank you.
Thank you very much, National Chief, and thank you, Mr. Greaves. Prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Now, we're going to Mr. Barcelou-Duval for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question will be to Mr. Saint-Hilaire. You were saying in your opening remarks that it is as if the government is giving itself emergency powers without admitting to it. So having the government give itself these powers without admitting it, without doing it openly and clearly, with a bill that is being passed with a gag order, I mean, how would this appear from a democratic and legal point of view? In fact, that was the problem that I wanted to highlight. The issue is with the emergency that is just not named, that goes beyond normality. But under normal circumstances, we have to have a debate on the use of emergency powers in a democratic society as ours. That is the role of the opposition to ask for this. If this is not a judicial duty, there needs to be reasonable grounds for believing in an emergency, but politically it's up to the executive to demonstrate this in the current circumstances, for instance, that the legislation does not allow us to face the situation. That's usually the level of evidence that needs to be put forward. And if you play with the concepts and make people believe that this is a normal bill, and if you don't refer to emergency situations and rely on the perception that everyone agrees, well, what you're doing is you're actually setting aside a significant body of legislation that is in the public interest. An emergency measure like this one here, it's always about choosing some objectives to the detriment of others. That is why you are making an exception to the normally applicable regime, which is there to protect the common good. But when it's an exception, you're putting the accent on something very specific here, that is on economic prosperity. It is Section 4 of the bill, but there's a cost to that, doing that. The cost is protecting the environment, public health, recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples, energy securities, civil liberties and securities. So that is a shortcoming of the bill when it comes to the existing body of legislation and the review aspect of things. It doesn't do the pros and cons assessment. It is put simply on the basis of the emergency aspect of things without taking into account protecting the common good. That is, of course, much wider. Thank you. That's a very interesting point. So when you look at the bill, and if you can do a thorough job of examining it under the present circumstances, you have to look at the objectives of the bill, but the consequences of having this piece of legislation on the other spheres of public life. So my other question is there anything in this bill which would limit the abusive use of these dispositions, of these provisions, because they are referring to exceptions to accelerate projects, but what guarantees in this bill that the exception will not end up becoming the norm? Well, that is exactly the risk. It's the risk of normalizing emergency measures. So you're not really underlining how severe of an act this is. You're not very transparent. You are blurring the lines between things. So you're creating a new regime. This is transferring the parliament's powers to the executive, and it gives the executive the power of taking projects and approving them on behalf of the legislator. A couple of years ago, Tom Fleming did some work on this, maybe another issue, but it's about normalizing the emergency situation. It is the reach of the executive branch of the government. So you've all heard about legislative inflation. Well, but the problem is the opposite. More and more in almost all Commonwealth countries, parliaments are abandoning this role, and they pass the puck, if you will, to the executive branch of the government. So this is an exceptions regime that confers a lot of power to the executive, which then in turn can use these powers to go beyond ordinary customary legislation, and what is supposed to be an exception becomes the normality, and the citizens cannot distinguish anymore between what's normal and what's exceptional. Thank you very much. This is very interesting, but I ran out of time. Thank you, Mr. Brasseur-Duval, and thank you, Mr. Saint-Hilaire.
Lawrence, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
I'm going to give my time to Ms. Stubbs.
Oh, Ms. Stubbs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleague. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank you, Chief Woodhouse, for being here. Because of the timeline that you have raised, I am going to turn my questioning to Ms. Swift, but I think from your comments, it should concern proponents of this legislation that if they continue on this course, although there may be goodwill and an attempt to try to get to yes in a good way on major projects, it seems likely that the outcomes will be challenged, which will then defeat the very purpose of the people of wanting to fast track projects in the first place. So I do hope that the Prime Minister and the ministers will listen to you as they are the decision makers too. Ms. Swift, I wonder if you would expand on the shortcomings in C5 that your coalition has identified, particularly around projects that will or will not make the cut, which are a mystery and will be done secretly and behind closed doors behind politicians, as far as we can tell so far.
Ms. Swift, unfortunately, once again, you're on mute, and I'm sure everybody here wants to hear what your response is, so we'll just wait for you.
Sorry.
Perfect. We'll make sure that you can restart your remarks. Yep.
Yeah. The wording in the bill is incredibly vague and generic. I mean, things like, well, we're going to approve projects that benefit the economy of Canada. Duh. I'm sorry, but that is just so, no, we're going to have projects that hurt Canada. It just sounds absurd to me. It tells me this was whipped together awfully quickly. So they're just basically mouthing platitudes instead of giving any kind of specific. What sector should these be in? I mean, we have a lot of information in this country about what type of projects are needed. Why not more specific? Well, because I think this has been whipped together awfully quickly. The government wants to give themselves an immense amount of leeway, and that's a problem. Let's face it, that's a problem. How can you pass a bill when you don't really even know what it's talking about? And the manufacturing community has suffered greatly over the last decade, sadly, because we say, as a country, we say that we want to retain a strong manufacturing sector. And part of our problem, and my background is as an economist, we say, or we know, we have a huge productivity issue in Canada. The number one sector that will help our productivity is manufacturing and actually oil and gas as well. Those are the sectors that are so productive that they bring up the productivity performance of the entire country. And yet those are being horribly neglected by the federal government and some provincial governments as well, to be fair. So the lack of specificity, the vagueness, I think that's a major, major problem. The government is asking for an enormous amount of trust, but they're not giving us enough detail to really warrant much trust on the part of the business community or the electorate in general.
And to your point, the sectors of the economy that have lost the most jobs in the last year are in fact manufacturing and all of the key sectors of natural resources. Do you have concerns about the fact that the 2-year timeline actually doesn't exist in the legislation? So these are claims about the timelines on which decisions will be made. And to your point, if you'd like to expand, like what is the point of all of this temporary work around rigmarole if there are 13 13 laws and 5 regulations that C5 can then circumvent, doesn't it seem more reasonable that the government would actually just fix those fundamentals and that would be the long-term predictable certain solution for investors?
That would be immensely important. Yes, I think why have a law out there, whatever it may be, Impact Assessment Act, emissions cap, etc. Why have these laws at all? Because if you want the power to override them, then you're basically telling us all that they're bad. So if they're bad, why keep them on the books? Get rid of them. And like I said before in my opening remarks, if you're an international investor, I'd be very distrustful. And Canada depends a lot on foreign investment, but even domestic investment too. If you're looking at keeping those problematic laws on the books, and yet saying, oh, we may override them from time to time just to do this particular project, which, mind you, we have very loosey-goosey, regulations around and so on. If I was a foreign investor, I'd avoid that like the plague. But that's what we need. We need investment badly. It has plummeted in Canada over the last number of years. And without it, we're going to remain a weak economy, bottom of the G7 like we are now, and a lower standard of living for all Canadians, because let's face it, if the economy isn't good, nobody's having a good time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Swift. Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Next, we'll go to Mr. Kellaway. Mr. Kellaway, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's an honor to be here today, to be with you. And Chief Woodhouse, I want to make sure I get the last name right, Nipinek? Okay. My dad was a coal miner in Nunamagi for probably 35 years. And he would often say to me, he didn't say a lot, but he would often say he never learned much when he was talking. It's about listening. And today I really want to thank you and others that are here today who have had some sidebar conversations. I hope to have more. I want to take this opportunity to give you time to talk a little bit about more. There may be things here that you want to unpack in relation to Section 5 and Section 6. You talked about free, prior, and informed consent, or it might be something that you didn't get a chance to, Chief, National Chief, to speak to. I want to give you this time to communicate that to us. I may have a question or two, or this is a simple matter of time for you to use.
Thank you. It's very kind of you. Thank you so very much. Look, I think when we talk about a national interest project, I think one thing that's common amongst First Nations is that, and it should be with Canadians as well, if we were to close the First Nations infrastructure gap, that would alone have a bigger economic impact than the negative aspect of all of Trump's tariffs if they were to remain. And it is the right thing to do. But also economically, the scale of it provides a huge return to First Nations, but as well to this country. And Prime Minister Carney had said that very quote during the AFN Virtual Leaders Forum during the election on April 25th, 2025. Canada can also demonstrate to the world that we can win by being inclusive and respecting rights and treaties. And because Canada's gross domestic product is generated off First Nations lands and resources, over $560 billion of projects are forecasted to be launched on our traditional lands over the next decade. The potential benefits are measured in the trillions of dollars, but they won't advance without First Nations support. Clean water, quality housing, reliable roads and power supplies, modern schools and healthcare facilities, high-speed internet, According to the Conference Board of Canada, a $350 billion investment to close the First Nations infrastructure gap by 2030 will generate over $635 billion in economic output over the next 7 years and create more than 300,000 jobs each year. And that's not just including First Nations, that's for many Canadians will benefit from that. This means that Canada moves from the last to the first in the G7 for average annual GDP per capita growth. So invest in closing our roads, invest in our schools. I think if that's one thing that we start off right now quickly, I think that that's the way to go. I also think split this bill and hold for the summer and start investing in First Nations infrastructure projects right in our communities, right across the country, so that we close that gap for all of our children. I was quite, it's just disheartening when you see it day in and day out. And I think that all of our kids, your kids, my kids, our grandkids deserve a better Canada than we have at the moment. And we can do that by working together and by making sure that the voices of First Peoples are heard. I think I'll also, if I have a moment, Mr. Chair, I also just want to say when we talk about FPIC, people always ask about that. And if you read the declaration carefully, the standard of free, prior, and informed consent is obtaining, not simply seeking consent. And FPIC means exactly what it says, free. That means the process of consulting with First Nations and obtaining consent must be free of intimidation, coercion, or other forms of duress. Prior means consultation and cooperation must take place before decisions are made, not after a bill is passed and projects pre-approved in advance of actual consultation and dialogue about consent. Informed means that Indigenous peoples must have access to all relevant information to make their own decisions. Critically, Indigenous peoples must have the time and opportunity to reach an informed conclusion based on their own forms of decision-making. Informed also means First Nations must be provided information regarding major projects and have access to proper assessment of potential consequences, such as an environmental and social impact assessment, including First Nations own such processes. So it may also require a human rights impact assessment for both collective rights and individual human rights. Translation of information into Indigenous language may also be required. So I think I just wanted to table that with you on, what we always talk about, free, prior, and informed consent. I wanted to give you that, table that with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, National Chief. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, National Chief. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lemire. Monsieur Lemire.
And now we'll go to Mr. Lemire. You have the floor for the next 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'd like to thank the witnesses, Mr. Saint-Hilaire especially. You've enlightened us. But you'll allow me to ask my question to the National Chief Woodhouse Nipinak. Yesterday at the Senate, I found what was being said very interesting. So C5, the standards of free, prior, and informed consent are not present in this legislation. So it is not presented in a concrete manner. With a more appropriate approach, maybe we could meet this requirements. We could move amendments, but we don't have the time, and that time was not awarded to us. So the adoption of Bill C5 in the current conditions, it's being forced under gag order. Do you think it could lead to decades of legal quarrels with the First Nations if it's done in this manner?
Well, because you're not hearing from First Nations directly, I think that's going to cause division right off the bat, as we're seeing. We had we see a protest on the hills of Legislature this afternoon. And I think you're going to see more of that. And I think nothing's off the table. I think First Nations are going to review all of the avenues that they always have. They've always protected themselves. They've always had to stand up for themselves. And it's so unnecessary. It's 2025. And we shouldn't treat each other like this. And, Trump may be treating his people like that on that side of the border. Let's not copy that. Let's be the good country that we're supposed to be by respecting each other. And, a treaty relationship is a two-way street, right? We have to work together. And so will it lead to legal issues later? Well, certainly if you're not talking to the rights holders, I'm sure they're going to take every tool in their toolbox and use what they need to protect themselves. And I don't blame them. And I think that, like I said, there's a real opportunity to have a conversation with First Nations to start to figure out, how to either make this bill better or B, write a new bill or whatever they have, but hear them out. And I think that's true for even Canadians. I mean, you're going to have legal wrangling right up the yin-yang if you don't do the right thing and do this bill in a proper, respectful, and good way. I think Canada can save itself years of litigation if they do that. Thank you.
Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses and all those that have come today to this meeting. My questions will be for Ms. Swift, so if we can get the unmute ready. And I think I know probably the answer to this question, although let me pose it to you so that you can elaborate. With all of the economic challenges that Canada is facing, does this bill meet the moment?
I don't believe it does. The problem really is that it's so vague that pretty much anything could be considered under its auspices. We would very much like to see more specificity, more acknowledgement of the very, very serious problems Canada is facing. I mean, Danielle Smith said something to me that I thought was very, very relevant a while ago. And it was basically that because we are not using our resources to our own country's advantage, and this doesn't just include oil and gas, this includes minerals. You know, we have such a wealth of resources in this country, and our government has squelched them over the last decade. There's no question about it. So the key, you can think of a family that, could be taking advantage of something and just doesn't. It's just so foolish. And she said the rest of the world looks at us and thinks we must be out of our minds. And that's very true. Other countries look at us. We know other countries have come to us and said,
let me interject.
LNGs.
Let me interject with a
before
question.
you ask your next question, I'm stopping your time here.
Okay.
Ms. Swift, would you be able to once again just lift up your boom mic a bit? It's just a request from the interpreters. They can hear you better that way.
Sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
apologies
just
necessary.
keep flipping down for some reason. But anyway, I'd like to see
let me
target
interject with
for
a question,
policy.
if I may. Sorry, because I agree with you completely. Canada has everything the world wants, and we should be booming. So I want to ask, particularly from the perspective of your coalition of manufacturers, I represent constituencies around Hamilton and in southwestern Ontario. Obviously, that's an important manufacturing base and was once a great area of strength for our economy. And so interprovincial certification and standards, can be just as costly and frustrating as international ones. And so does this bill address that problem at all?
Well, I think it starts to. Again, that's also, and I agree with the chief, that we should separate these two parts of the bill because they're very different and they need different consideration. So, sticking them together and, everybody opposes omnibus bills when they're in opposition. And then when they're in government, they include all the omnibus bills because they want the controversial stuff included with the stuff that other people would normally agree with. So I think it makes a start, to be fair, but I've been around this issue for a long, long time, many decades, and everybody agrees with it, but then nothing actually happens, or very little actually happens. So once again, I'd like to see more specifics around it. Everyone has good intentions, but when it comes right down to the details, you see provinces hanging on to their little fiefdoms of whatever kind, and the federal government not doing too much about that. So I would like to see it go an awful lot further. But once again, generics, I guess, are politically acceptable because, they're trying to do something about this. But anybody that knows the history of interprovincial trade barriers knows we need a lot more precise action than we have seen in the bill.
So this is a baby step forward, probably more symbolism than anything else.
To date, yes. But I'd be the happiest person if we could actually get some action here. But once again, I've been on this issue for decades. I was the former president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, as you may know. And boy, I've seen government after government after government of different political stripes, say we're going to do something about this and so on and so forth. I'm actually more encouraged, to be honest with you, at the provinces who have initiated things and said, okay, we're going to drop all of our barriers with province X, and like Tim Houston did.
Is there an example of province that's moving forward on that?
Yeah, I think Tim Houston, for example, he in Nova Scotia has done some good things on that. We did have back a bunch of years ago a number of Western provinces, notably Alberta, Saskatchewan, who got together in a sort of an alliance. So they dropped barriers between them. But actually, the two biggest provinces in the country, Ontario and Quebec, are some of the worst players in this. So they need to get part. And recently, we've heard some good noises, coming out of both of those provinces. But again, action is what counts, as we all know. And I think to date, we've heard good talk, but I'd like to see it actually happen. And unfortunately,
Thank you.
These laws have built up over time. So some businesses have complied with the laws, which they should, but they've done it to a point that if their laws are changed, they're going to fight it, right? So it's a very difficult issue. It really is a difficult issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Swift, and thank you, Mr. Muse. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Lauzon. Monsieur Lauzon, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît. La parole est à vous.
Merci. Mr. Lauzon, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to continue and echo what Ms. Swift was saying. I wasn't going to be asking her a question, but I've got something that came to mind. No, you said we're going too fast, but also we're too slow when it comes to oil. We've had witnesses tell us about energy corridors, electrifying Canada, small modular reactors. So my question is very simple, Ms. Swift. Do you sincerely believe that the fact of having a coalition of provinces, territories, municipalities will improve project deployment in the future with T5?
Well, good question. Not an easy answer. I don't. To be honest, I really don't know. I just think this is a power grab. To be honest with you, I think it's a power grab by the federal government, and because it is so ill-defined and non-specific. We heard in the throne speech, for example, and the oil and gas thing is a big deal. And if people really think that our policies that have really hobbled that sector for the last decade were effective, they just have to look at the basic economic data to know that that's not the case. And it is truly the answer of how we quickly get, because nothing happens tomorrow. This is the other thing. Nothing will happen tomorrow. All of these projects need a lot of lead time. I find the nuclear prospect very promising, and the fact that more people are accepting it as a sensible solution because it's a clean, very clean form of energy. But again, a nuclear reaction facility has lead time of 15 to 20 years. So that's not going to be the quick fix that we would like to have in Canada to fix our economy. So I don't think C5 does it, to be honest with you. I think it's too loose, and it's effectively a power grab. And analyzing it as a Canadian, as an economist, I have no idea what it's going to end up with. There's so much subjectivity and trust in the current government to implement it properly, to really benefit Canadians, not just hand more money to Liberals, their Liberal friends. I don't think it's there. I think we need a lot more detail. We need to work on it. It was whipped together quickly. I think anybody that knows legislation knows it was whipped together very quickly, and that's why it's so generic.
Monsieur le Président, en tout respect, la
specific,
traduction ne se fait plus. Je crois que la témoin est difficile à entendre pour les traducteurs. Merci.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think the witness was hard to hear.
Make sure that your mic is up and you're not on mute.
Okay. Yeah, you're okay. Oh, can you see? I'm just waiting.
So where do we lost the translation?
On sait pas encore. Ils sont en train de communiquer avec notre greffier.
Donc, ce que je constatais, Monsieur le Président, c'est que
What I was able to see, Mr. Chair, that the interpretation got slower, but some information could not be transmitted due to sound quality.
difficile parce que j'écoutais la traduction.
OK.
The short answer is no, I don't believe C5 accomplishes that.
This is a short answer.
Thank you. I think it should still, translation should be working. I'm just going to look over
It
at my,
is.
it works? Okay, so you have 1 minute left, Monsieur Lauzon.
1 minute left. Je vais retourner vers Monsieur Saint-Hilaire. Vous savez, vous avez fait beaucoup
I'll
référence.
come back to Mr. Saint-Hilaire. You referred to emergency measures quite a bit, and the bill is very clear that it's focused on one Canadian economy, and it's about building a stronger economy. We're not talking about an emergency, really, but we are talking about coping with what's happening internationally with the United States, expanding our markets, doing more with what we have in Canada, and doing better. I don't see this as an emergency measure. You referred to this as being an emergency measure, but there's urgency to act. Canada is at the crossroads, and the measures that we need to take, commercial and the illegal commercial situation, the tariff situation, we have to do something about it, and there are different ways of doing it. But there's nothing that could define us more as a country than coming up with these projects. So how can you do nuance? How can you preserve the difference between emergencies and C5 that will help us improve our capacity to build in Canada? In law, an emergency, it's a derogation to common law. So you are a parliamentarian. Legislation has been adopted with the purpose of protecting the common good, with all kinds of other objectives, the environment, energy security, transparency, participation of different communities. So there are all kinds of common good that is looked after by the legislator. But emergency measures start to put all of this aside to give powers to the executive that it normally does not have. So judicially speaking, the bill before us does that. But we're talking about removing trade barriers. That's the purpose between provinces and territories. It's not an emergency measure as you interpret it, because you are interpreting the Emergency Measures Act. But in Bill C5, we're looking at breaking down interprovincial trade barriers and creating new energy corridors to be more efficient. Is this a question that unfortunately, you're out of time? Thank you very much, Mr. Lauzon.
No, I'm okay with no answer.
We've gone over 40 seconds for Mr. Lauzon, and I want to make sure that we have the time for Ms. Kazan. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
I just wanted to start out by thanking committee for giving me time on this to ask questions on this very important bill. I'm very grateful. Bill C-15, Article 5, states that the Government of Canada must, in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous people, take all measures necessary to ensure that the laws of Canada are consistent with the Declaration. And that was the purpose of the bill. That was the purpose of C-15, to ensure that all laws of Canada were consistent with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In your opinion, is Bill C-5 consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I should have said.
Do you want to go through that from a legal perspective, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
When looking at Section 5 of the UN Declaration Act, it's not just an interpretive aid, it was actually an operational provision, which meant that the laws of Canada should include FPIC, and not just as sort of an example or some sort of interpretation. It had to be operational. And is Bill C-5, does it operationalize FPIC? The only thing we can turn to is the whereas clauses as an interpretive aid. So in that meaning, in the meaning of what Section 5 of UNDA was supposed to be, operational, then we can't say no. We can't say it is because it's not operational within C5. It's only used as an interpretive aid.
Thank you very much for that. It also, one of the things that's shocking about the bill to me is this kind of overreaching power of cabinet and ministers. And one of the articles I find particularly disturbing, like quite disturbing, it says that the government and council may consider any factor that the governor and council considers relevant, including to the extent of which the project can, and they list a bunch of things, advance the interests of Indigenous people. What is disturbing about that for me is that they use the same arguments in the creation of residential schools, that it was in the best interests of Indigenous peoples. It is colonialism from the 1700s. Do you agree that particular, I mean, the bill in itself is harmful, but would you agree with me that is particularly disturbing, that the governor and council has the power to decide what's in the interests of Indigenous people rather than Indigenous peoples themselves?
Absolutely. I think that, and of course we haven't had time to go through this legally. We've only had one in 7 days. I've had a few lawyers look through it. I need a few more to look through this, and absolutely that we don't repeat what happened in the past. And I think this overreach, I think it's very, very, very concerning. But like I said, I wish you can hear from our leadership. We haven't had a full, thorough conversation on this, and we are asking you please to slow this down a bit and put the brakes on so that we can talk through this through the summer with all of you properly. I think I'll close it off and say that.
So going on, you spoke about Article 19 of UNDRIP, that it provides states, or it provides that states need to seek and obtain FPIC of Indigenous peoples before adopting a legislative measure. Has the federal government upheld this obligation in C5, yes or no?
They have not.
They have not. And as the national chief of more than 600 First Nations, do you share that Bill C5's proposition that the cabinet can determine what is in the best interest of Indigenous peoples? We had just discussed that. Do you think that can be amended, or do you think going back to FPIC, or Article 19 of UNDRIP, one of the things they talk about is in good faith? Do you think that that is a demonstration of good faith?
It's not, and I think that I'll say that Parliament and, of course, the Senate itself, I told them this in Senate yesterday, I told the senators that, to follow your own laws and follow the laws that we've hard fought in courts. Unfortunately, that's what First Nations have been relying on over the past many, many years. And we keep winning in courts against provinces, against the federal government. Are we done in court yet? Do we want to start to sit here and get some real traction together? Or are we going to go back to court again? Like, we're always in court and fighting really hard for every piece that champions and solidifies us as people in this country. And I think that starts with respect, and there's no respect here, folks, my friends. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kazan, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
On behalf of all members of this committee, I want to express our sincere gratitude to you, National Chief Woodhouse Nipanak, à vous, Monsieur Saint-Hilaire, and of course you, Ms. Swift, for joining us and sharing your testimony on this very important piece of legislation. Let's keep this discussion going. With that, this meeting is adjourned.